starting right now. And we've also provided closed captions at the bottom of your screen. So thanks again for joining us today, and Kathy, Irina, and Jackie, the floor is yours.
Hi there. I think I'll kick things off. I'm Dr. Jackie Ebner, one of the report co-authors. And we're going to take you through today the key findings as been set the stage. So the report is Chemical Recycling, a False Promise for the Ohio River Valley. One of the important findings, the first key finding, is that chemical recycling sometimes is called advanced or molecular recycling. And it's not a monolith. It's a lot of different processes and technologies, but generally defined as processes that break down plastic waste using chemicals or heat into components that can then be recreated back into a virgin-like plastic material. We can go ahead on to the next slide. So just a little primer on the different types of chemical recycling. Again, even within the categories, there's quite a bit of variation. So the devil is really in the details. It's important to know what we're talking about. Mechanical recycling is the predominant technology for recycling plastics today. It's essentially, a physical process where used plastic is shredded and then sorted, either optically sorted or usually some sort of a float sink technology, and then re-extruded into pellets. So this technology is, as I said, the predominant technology. However, there are some issues with it. And, the report discusses how plastic really was not designed and is not really a recyclable material in many ways. So there are technical challenges and social and economic challenges to recycling plastics. So some of the main issues with mechanical recycling is that there's a degradation in the thermochemical properties of the recyclate that comes out. So there's some stress that is imparted on the plastics in the extrusion process that makes it not really suitable for some applications. So quite often mechanically recycled plastics will be downcycled, or what we call open loop recycled. So they're not made into the same product again, but they're downcycled into a lower quality product and not often able to be used in like food grade or high engineered applications. So there has been a lot of work in this field of advanced recycling technologies, I say in quotes, to try to come up with a way that you can create more virgin-like plastic quality, and also not so limited in terms of the feedstock. So really today, mechanical recycling is really only for like number 1 and number 2 plastics. So PET and HDPE, maybe a little bit of polypropylene. So the first tier would be a purification process. So in purification processes, it's similar to a physical process, except we're using a solvent or some sort of chemical to separate colorants and additives from the polymer. We're not actually changing the polymer structure. So the polymer that comes in, and it has to be a pure polymer that comes in, is the polymer that comes out. So we call that like a polymer loop, because we're not really changing the polymer that comes in, and we're just stripping away some additives or colorants to come up with sort of a virgin-like product. We see, as we go further to the left here, you'll see that there's more involved in breaking the plastic down into constituents that then need to be remade into plastic again. So the value that's retained goes down as you go further along the process, and the energy and chemicals and the waste coming out of the process increase as you go further down. So kind of the first level would be this purification process. We see somewhere around similar loss and similar greenhouse gas benefit to mechanical recycling. And then we have depolymerization technologies. Here we're actually breaking down the polymer into monomer constituents that then can be reformed. This is also done usually with a chemical, sometimes a thermochemical process, to break down the polymers into monomers that then need to be reformed. So again, we're going further down the process, so we're going to have more loss in the process and require more energy and create more waste to create those processes. These are largely pilot scale processes, and there are a lot of different technologies, and each of them have, varying trade-offs and benefits. By far the most predominant chemical recycling process fall into this conversion technology, which is sometimes called thermolysis or thermochemical conversion. So these are processes that involve temperature and often chemicals to break down the plastics all the way to hydrocarbons that can then be completely remade back into plastics or into basic chemicals that can be made into plastics. So at this point, we're seeing a lot of loss, maybe 20% of the, base chemical is retained. A lot of the waste and the additives and the chemicals that go into the plastics in the first place end up as waste. And there's this very energy intensive and toxic process to make it back into plastics. And by the way, these processes can be tweaked so that they may not actually even make plastic. So let's go on to the next slide, and we'll get to the second key finding. So that's kind of an overview of technologies. We can talk a little bit more about them, and you'll see which ones are the predominant ones in the Ohio River area. So the most common form of chemical recycling is not, in fact, recycling. So as I mentioned, these conversion technologies are the most common, and many of those conversion technologies don't actually create plastics. And there are a variety of reasons why that might happen, but certainly market dynamics plays a role. And quite often these processes will create fuel. And if you're taking plastics and you're converting them into fuel, that is in no way recycling or a circular process. That is basically, a fossil fuel. And only 10 chemical, as I mentioned, many of these technologies are at early stages. So the purification and the polymerization technologies are often in the pilot or early demonstration stages. Some of the conversion technologies might be, demonstration or commercialization stages. None have been commercially successful, and 2 of the 10 in the United States are in the Ohio River Valley, Altera and PureCycle, and several more have been proposed. And I think if we go on to the next slide, I will hand it off to my colleague, Irina, who will take you through the particulars of the facilities operating in the Ohio River Valley.
Thank you, Jackie. So we analyzed how many facilities and which ones, what types, mapping to what Jackie just described, the type of chemical recycling. And we found 9 facilities as of beginning of our actually working on the report. There were 9 facilities, and now Encina closed and it was canceled. And Sandy will talk about it more after we present the report. So out of 8 now proposed or operational facilities, only 2 are operational. And even then, you can see them on the left side of this map. On top is Altera, which is located in Akron, Ohio. And it's a a specific type of pyrolysis plant. And on the very bottom on this of the same side is PureCycle, which is an example of solvent-based purification. These two plants so far were in mostly testing mode and produce very little output today. The rest of the facilities, and there are 6 of them, six of them. Most of them are also pyrolysis or planned to be pyrolysis and gasification plants. Most of them are located in Ohio, as you can see, and 2 in West Virginia. Next slide, please. So plastic recycling processes are very toxic. Actual chemical plastic recycling processes are toxic and dangerous for both workers and communities. Why are they so toxic? I want to go back a little bit and see how the plastics actually are created from virgin components. So when plastics are created, they contain the main part of its composition is polymers, as Jackie described before. But it's not just polymers. Plastics, as you notice from your life, can be hard or soft, different colors, different purposes for these plastics. So all this is due to additives added to these polymers. Additives create pliability of plastic, fire retardancy, and colors, and a lot of other qualities with value in plastics. There are also non-intentionally added substances in plastics, which are there from contamination during the use, during the production. So when these plastics become waste and recycled through a chemical process, again, as Jackie described before, the end result of it is either the monomers or polymers or the very base of the plastics, the base elements. So where do all these additives go? The additives are going, they are not needed for production of plastics or even for fuel in most cases. In most cases, they end up as emissions from chemical recycling process, solid waste, which, if improperly disposed, can contaminate water and air in the places where it's disposed of. And also, very often, they still stay in the output from the chemical recycling and then contaminate the output products. And by definition, chemical recycling using water for their processes can contaminate the resulting water output as well. So again, by definition, since the chemical recycling is toxic and all this contamination going on, it does affect the community where these facilities are located, and of course the workers who work in these facilities. So can you please go to the next slide? Before we go to specifics about location of this facilities, I want to mention that plastics production in general and in future or even now the chemical recycling process results in a lot of health costs for the society. An example from 2015 shows that in that year the plastic production cost $592 billion in health cost to the society. And to go in more details, which you see on the left, it included accidents and injuries at the processing plants, emissions as particulates and gases, exposure to different chemicals such as benzene and formaldehyde, and upstream emissions and disposal emissions. CO2 or carbon dioxide emissions only cost the society $341 billion. Next slide, please. So The trend right now is to co-locate chemical recycling plants where existing petrochemical facilities are already located. And historically, existing petrochemical facilities are located mostly in low-income communities and communities of color. And this imposes environmental burdens and environmental injustice on their communities. Next slide, please. Here we analyze the facilities which I showed on the previous map. We analyzed it through a tool which shows the level of environmental injustice in these communities. So 9 plants, as you can see, in 3 different states, and 6. And if you look at the gray graph, gray colored graph, that shows the population income in those cities where these facilities are located. So 6 out of 9 facilities are located in the areas of where the population income is lower than the state average, and 3 out of and if you look at the green graph here, that shows the communities of predominantly people of color, and 3 out of the plant facilities or existing facilities are located in the places where the community, the predominance of people of color in the communities is higher than the state average. So this supports the fact that chemical recycling plants are co-located or located in the communities with environmental justice issues. Next, the next slide, I think I pass on to Kathy.
Thank you. So I think we've got a good technical overview of chemical recycling. The part I focused on is that it's financially risky. It is unproven. The business case has never been proven. There's a reason there are only 10 facilities currently operating in the United States, and those are not producing at scale. They, in many cases, are not producing anything, and they're not recycling. So it's, in a sense, we shouldn't call it recycling at all. Mostly the technologies are immature, they're unproven. There are many promises when these facilities are announced that they will be able to, quote unquote, recycle huge amounts. And then years later, they are still on the planning. Many of them have been canceled. Many of them that were producing something at all ended up getting canceled. There was a joint venture in Oregon. And while we were writing this report, that despite actually producing something, did get closed because the finances were so bad. The supply chains for this, you have to still collect all of the plastic, which is very expensive, sort it, clean it, and then the machinery to do it is highly capital intensive. There is no infrastructure there, and the dynamics, the market dynamics of who will buy this is yet to emerge. So without huge amounts of government subsidies, we feel like the headwinds facing this industry are extreme. Just in the last couple of days, Australia decided to relaunch a chemical recycling operation because they discovered that the one that was operating there was collecting plastic and storing them all over the country in different warehouses, but not actually recycling them. And that is something that we have found also in the United States. In some cases, they claim that they've recycled plastic, and they're then showing the market virgin plastic, not in fact recycled plastic. So the question is, who's supporting this immature technology, this financially risky business, this pie in the sky idea that can be so toxic to local communities and workers? And many people don't realize that it's part of the fossil fuel industry. Plastics come from petrochemicals. Petrochemicals, the word petro is in there. It is the fossil fuel industry. And the fossil fuel industry, these huge energy giants, make 20 and 30 and 40-year forecasts, and they can determine that the demand for transport fuel, for gasoline for cars, for planes, for trains, etc., for ships, will ultimately peak and start to decline. They're seeing this and they've got a plan B, which is where will the growth come from? And so as oil goes down, they can plan for perhaps natural gas continuing to increase, but even that at some point during the energy transition is expected to peak and ultimately decline. So their plan B is the world will need endless amounts of petrochemicals, especially the developing countries that will need more plastic. This is the theory. And as we know, the use of plastic has grown very rapidly in the past 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So one of the reasons they are pushing, we believe, and CII did an incredible report that came out in February of this year, saying that the fossil fuel industry has known for decades that plastic recycling will not even address the plastic pollution problem. But they're able to say, don't worry about so much plastic out there because it can always be recycled. And this perception has enabled the unbridled growth of virgin plastics. So we talk about how Exxon knew or Shell knew that there would be a problem with the carbon in the atmosphere, and they knew this decades ago. They've also known that there is really no solution to the plastic problem for end of life. It has never been, it's never been this, so it's been a false idea that plastic could be recycled. So we feel that chemical recycling is not a silver bullet to solve the plastic pollution problem. Far from it. As Irina pointed out, it's very, very toxic. And it sounds great, but unlike, for example, glass or paper or metal that can be recycled and remade into more glass, more paper, more metal, chemical recycling, for the most part, is only taking plastic and in a highly toxic process, turning it into fuel. It's incredibly inefficient. So it is not the silver bullet. And we think it's really important for citizens in the community, policymakers, to look at other options. And there are many other options for this. And the industry, one of the things that we have in the report is going back to 2009, industry has often supported research. They've funded research, they've supported research that promises huge numbers of jobs, thousands of construction jobs, hundreds of permanent jobs, very little pollution, and this is meant to be a solution. And in many cases, we saw that with the Shell cracker plant. Shell funded 2 studies that were widely shared and widely cited that promised billions of economic development for the region over 40 years. And these studies are often not challenged, and people get excited about the number of jobs that it might come. And they sometimes overlook the obvious problems with these potentially new economic development ideas. And they overlook the idea that it will very radically change these communities with the toxicity. So ORVI has promoted a couple of different ideas. One of them was a roadmap for industrial decarbonization in Pennsylvania. And this is a forward-looking idea that industrial decarbonization is expected to happen. It must happen. And how can Stratogen work with its researchers to say there's a chance to really take advantage of this forward-looking idea, and it will create jobs, good paying jobs, local jobs, clean jobs, and it's really a fantastic idea. We, my co-authors and I, as well as Nick Messenger, worked on a report that came out a few months ago on green steel. And it's a way to take advantage of Pennsylvania's long history as a steel producer and to be able to make nearly carbon-free steel. And it's really cutting edge technology. It's only being done right now in Sweden and one place in the United States through some of the 2022 infrastructure and IRA amounts. They had some industrial decarbonization money. And we feel that Pennsylvania and this region is ideally situated to take advantage, and there would be tremendous first mover advantages for moving that way. You'd end up with a hub with renewable energy, and downstream and upstream, you would be able to create jobs and really develop what, you know, centuries ago was traditional steel and the integrated steel mills, but instead looking forward at something that would be excellent for the region. And these are just two that we cited because we do believe there are better options out there, and the citizens and the policymakers can seize a better opportunity than chemical recycling. Which is why I would like to turn it over to Sandy, who will talk about how opposition to one was highly successful.
Great, thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. So I think you're going to find that during my talk that all of the points that the previous speakers have brought up are going to be reflected in what our experience on the ground was in Point Township, Pennsylvania. But first, I'd like to say I know that there are a lot of people on this call who helped us in some way. We're part of the group. We're involved in helping us with financial support, and I just want to say thank you to all those folks who helped, who pitched in. It took everyone and everyone's expertise, and I just really appreciate it. So I'm going to talk about the work of our Save Our Susquehanna group. I was the chair of the group, but by no means the leader. They did their own thing, and I facilitated it. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Ben. So first, I'll just tell you about the proposal was for a chemical recycling plant. They were going to take 450,000 tons of post-consumer plastic, process it by catalytic pyrolysis, and make chemicals, benzene, toluene, xylene, and propylene. And these were going to be shipped by rail along the site in the Susquehanna River. You can see the site there in the image right along the river. They were going to draw 2.9 million gallons of water per day to wash and sort the plastic. And the plastic would be brought by about 100 trucks per day to the site. They promised 300 jobs, and they said it was going to take $1 billion to build it. If you could go to the next slide, please. The local residents were concerned that the site was in the 100-year floodplain of the Susquehanna River. And of course, if you live in the Susquehanna Valley, we say when the river floods, not if, because we know that that will happen. And of course, with climate impacts, those happening even more often than every 100 years. We were concerned about air pollution from the burning of the plastics, as well as powering this very energy intensive process, as the speakers mentioned. We're concerned about water pollution from that washing and sorting process would generate microplastic in the wastewater, and also PFAS contamination. So those forever chemicals that are used in making the plastic would be shed into that water. Traffic, I mentioned, a truck every 5 minutes along a very rural little highway along the river. Light and noise pollution, especially for the people who live across the street. I mentioned toxic chemicals that they were going to make. They were going to be stored on site, and we were also concerned about any possible derailment shipping those chemicals along the river. And then we were very concerned as the process. So we fought this thing for 2 years, from April 2022 to April of this year. And I'll show you that the messaging about what they were doing and what it was going to mean to our area changed during those 2 years. And that was very concerning to us. So I'll just talk to you, go to the next slide, please, Ben, about some of the promises that they made. I mentioned 300 local jobs. They said there would be $2 billion in local economic development, but never substantiated those numbers. They said it was going to be completely circular recycling process, which, as the speakers just showed you, is not really, it's not really a thing. It's making chemicals from plastic is not recycling. They said all the emissions would stay in the building. I don't want my family to work in that building then. They'll follow all regulations. I mentioned that there would be PFAS and microplastic in the water. Those are not currently regulated in wastewater. So even if they follow all the regulations, they can still put PFAS and microplastic in our water. They said that they were environmentalists just like us, and that they're going to solve the plastics crisis. And that's of course very, you know, a lot of people want to hear that. They want a solution to the plastics crisis. Nothing unites people like plastics and the plastics crisis, because everyone can see it in their lives. They said that they had a pilot plant in Texas, a demonstration plant, as some of the speakers mentioned. These things are all very early in their adoption and development, and we never had any evidence that they actually had a pilot plant in Texas where they did the whole thing. They might have done little parts of it, but they never did the whole thing. We tried to find out about emissions from this pilot plant, but we couldn't find out anything. They said that the water would be cleaner when they put it back in the river than when they took it out. And I'll tell you that this really made people mad in our area, because we have worked for a long time to clean our river. And they implied that our river was a dirty, stinky river, and we were really mad about that. And they also talked about having their own emergency response team. We wouldn't have to be concerned about that. You know, in our rural area, we only have volunteer firefighters for the most part. And these plants are known, because plastics are fossil fuels, they burn, and they burn terrifically toxically. And so we were very concerned that you know, those firefighters, if there's a fire, are only going to protect their stuff and not our stuff. And then I skipped one in the middle. They said that they buttered us up a little, saying we had a unique workforce and lots of universities and the people that they needed to do this work. But we also, during the process, heard them insulting the way people talk around here and our level of education. And so, you know, it just, over time, we started to have suspicions that they might not be telling the truth. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So how did we fight them? And my strategy, I call push all the buttons. We didn't know what was going to work. We thought, you know, we had some ideas about what would be important, you know, outreach, local outreach, upstream and downstream outreach, because this thing is going to impact everyone in the, you know, the whole river valley. We needed to reach out to the regulatory agencies and follow that stuff. So we just did everything. And something that really helped us, we had a lot of advice from environmental groups. Clean Air Council was with us from the beginning, and also Climate Reality Project, which I'm a member of, but other groups that have expertise in this area. So we did our homework first, and you can see from the speakers' talks, there's a lot of chemistry in this homework. And so, you know, it was a lot of learning new things, but that was important for us to be able to counter the greenwashing about advanced recycling, which everyone wanted to be true. And so One thing that really helped us was early on in 2023, some Bucknell students, environmental studies students, joined the group, and they did canvassing across the street from the site. And all of those local people didn't know about the plant, or they thought it was a done deal because $1 billion talks really loud. You can see that top picture there is the students with Eleanor from Clean Air Council and some of the local folks. And then when they did the canvassing, all those local people joined the group too. And they were really important as part of the group because they had their personal stories, the personal impacts of living across the street from the river or living across the street from a chemical plant. And so that turned out to be really important. The other thing that I want to mention that was really important for our group was, I mentioned before that plastics unites people. Everybody hates plastics. They recognize the plastics crisis. Our group was so diverse in terms of political points of view, ages, backgrounds. Everyone was mad about plastic and this thing that promised to solve the crisis, but wasn't really going to. And so that really helped us in talking to our rural Republican representatives, for example. You know, people who had shared their views could say, I voted for you and I don't want this thing. So that really helped us as well. I have a list here. We had signs and mailers. We did tabling. We did canvassing. We had 3 public meetings. We had a wonderful person join the group who was a videographer. We made some very compelling videos. The students helped us with designing a website and a logo, and just their general energy. They really brought a lot. We had students last spring and this spring, a different batch. Terrific addition to the group. So one thing that helped us was talking to all of the upstream and downstream communities, because Point Township was going to have some regulatory ability, over this plant, but the rest of them were not, all the upstream and downstream communities. So we got one of them, Northumberland Borough, to pass an anti-encina resolution, and that really made a big difference as well. So go to the next slide, please. We also talked to the regulatory agencies. We talked to the Department of Environmental Protection. In this, we also had a bit of an advantage. We had a guy join our group kind of late who retired from DEP. And so when we went to that meeting, instead of, welcome citizens to our meeting with your agency, it was, hey, Dave, dude, I wish we were still catching fish together. And we just had this big, back slapping kind of, like I imagine industry has these kind of meetings. But we had that kind of meeting and we were thrilled. And so that worked out for us. But, these things are all random and you have to form your own group and make use of your own strengths. One of the things I also want to mention is that both DEP and others who we talked to thanked us for our approach. We consistently expressed our legitimate concerns about the project. We certainly had plenty of them. We didn't deal in any conspiracy theories or backroom dealings. We think that stuff happened, but we didn't talk about that stuff. We talked about air pollution and water pollution and microplastics and all of those things. I mentioned our great support from Clean Air Council. You can see some of them here, and also Climate Reality Project in this picture. And then we had a lot of funding from various people. I have a note to myself I want to mention. Oh, one of the other things I want to mention is that one of the strengths of our group was that we stayed together. A lot of these environmental groups coalesce and people have different ideas, and then the group tears itself apart with these different ideas. And we did have some of that energy, but we were able to overcome it and stick together and have a consistent messaging, and that really helped. So go to the next slide, please. And then we won. So Encina went a little quiet around December, and I started to have a feeling they were either going to come out with something really big, or they were going to come out with, or they were going to go away. And it turns out they went away. They said that their clients were asking for so much product that they had to find a bigger site. instead of acknowledging that they were bumbling their permits, they didn't know what they were doing, they had no investors, and they had very, very successful local opposition. That is what beat them out of town, and we take full credit. And so we changed our signs. If you could go to the next slide, please. We stopped Encina, and I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and thanks so much to Kathy, Irina, and Jackie for your presentation. Yeah, again, please feel free to add any questions you might have to the chat and Q&A. I will drop a link to our report in the chat in just a moment. We've got a question about sharing out the slides. We will be sure to do that. We'll share out the slides. We'll share out a copy of the report. We'll share out copies of both reports that Kathy mentioned toward the end of the call. Those are available on the Ohio River Valley Institute's website. But again, if you've got a question for any of our panelists, please feel free to add that to the chat or the Q&A. Sandy, what is Save Our Susquehanna up to now that you've won? What comes next for your group?
Well, so that was really interesting. The day that they went out of town, we had a meeting and we all celebrated in our little Zoom windows, and we were so thrilled and everything. And then everyone started talking about what are we going to do next, because they didn't want to be a not in my backyard fight. They wanted to chase Encina, and this whole raise awareness that this whole process is toxic and not a solution. And so we're reaching out to some of those plants that Irina showed in West Virginia, and also one that is proposed for Massachusetts. We want to see if we can help them. And the other thing that people want to do in our area is if kind of what Kathy was talking about, where, if we don't want Encina, we don't want this big chemical recycling, what do we want? And so we're talking to that economic development group that brought Encina to the area, and we want to say, look, these are not the jobs that we want. These are not the jobs that are going to keep people in our area. And so we have kind of two arms now, and that's what we're focused on. And I couldn't be more impressed with this group of people. Just, they just want to keep going. But another thing I'll say is Encina was saying, we're going to build a bunch of these plants in Pennsylvania. And when they left, they were not saying they were going to build anything else in Pennsylvania. So yeah, we couldn't be more thrilled.
That's awesome. I'm seeing a lot of appreciation, congratulations in the chat here. Sandy, another question for you. What methods did you utilize to maintain cohesion within your group and to ensure that the message and efforts stayed above the conflict?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of behind the scenes long phone calls with people about how I wasn't doing things right and stuff like that. And, organizations include people, and people are challenging sometimes. And so you have to deal with personalities and whatever. And that was fine. What I did in the meetings was emphasize that the diversity of our group was our strength. And even if we didn't all agree on everything, we agreed on this one thing, and that was where we really had power. And that separating us was their whole tactic. That's what they wanted, was for us to fall apart. And so I tried to emphasize that in the meetings, and luckily it worked. The other thing I did was kind of let people do whatever they felt compelled to do. If they wanted to host a public meeting, if they wanted to canvass, if they wanted to write letters, if they just wanted to get all nerdy in their computer and do research, I let them do all that stuff. And then just come back and tell me what they did, and we would run with it. So it just, let people be amazing, and they'll do it.
Thank you. And yeah, please feel free to drop questions, comments in the chat of the Q&A here if questions occur to you later, please feel free to reach out to us. I'll add my email to the chat here. We're always happy to answer any questions you might have about the report.
Can I ask a question of the other? So did you
Please.
guys look at how the messaging is changing from this industry? It's something that we've really tried to follow.
Not specifically, but what has been frustrating is that some of the plants change their direction. So it will make it very hard for local opposition because they say that they're going to use one process and then they are shifting to another. And so it's difficult to know what they're exactly going to do. And they are all, as you say, everybody does get excited about a solution to the plastic pollution problem. And no one really wants to hear. I listened to Jeremy Grantham speak, and he said, I'm old enough, I believe he's in his early 80s, to remember a day before plastic, and people were able to live. It seems almost inconceivable that we would reduce production of plastic at this point, but that does seem to be reuse and start to talk about reducing the amount of plastic. Certainly, single-use plastic has to be eliminated immediately, but there's got to be a path with that, and the industry is not addressing any kind of reduction in plastic production. They're fighting that, obviously.
Right. We've got a few other questions in the chat here. How do you hope to see recycling playing out as a waste management solution for the region, or what alternative approaches would you like to see to the plastics pollution crisis?
Yeah, I think Kathy really hit it right on the head there. That there may be a role in a very small scale for some applications of plastic to try and look at recycling as a solution for that, but really source reduction has to be the answer. We really can get by with much less plastic, and elimination of single-use plastic is great. We're seeing some legislation like extended producer responsibility laws in several states in the United States. I think those have some promise. There are certainly issues with the implementation of them, differing from the theory. They're not perfectly implemented, but I think that there's some potential there as well to try and really reduce some of the packaging. So I think source reduction, reuse, building a real circular economy are the solutions I think we'd like to see. And for the very few applications where plastic is really, a good solution, then yeah, perhaps, there are some solutions to use it, recycle it.
Thank you.
One other thing we didn't talk about on this webinar was the idea that the industry is behind efforts to reclassify many of the techniques as manufacturing, and they have in the past been called solid waste incineration, which is regulated by the EPA at the federal level with the strictest standards. Which you can imagine, and it could be a small facility, a huge facility, but these are the most strict, stringent standards of air pollution under the Clean Air Act. And what the industry has done is gone to the states and said, why don't you consider these to be manufacturing? Because we take plastic and we make pyrolysis oil, and the pyrolysis oil can in fact turn back into plastic at some point. So let's just call it plastic. and call it recycling and call it manufacturing. And manufacturing has much less regulation and much less scrutiny with the laws under the Clean Air Act. And we spoke to a lawyer from Earth Justice, and he said, this is the latest that this industry says, don't consider us solid waste incinerators, consider us manufacturing. He said, this has been going on for 20 or 30 years because the industry would like to have less scrutiny over its practices rather than more. And 25 states have agreed to reclassify it as manufacturing, and all of the ones, unfortunately, in the Ohio River Valley. So make sure if it comes to your community that they filed all the necessary permits and the correct permits, and make sure that you're working with local council if there's any doubt about whether they filed the right permits. But right now they are classified under solid waste incinerators.
So I'll just add to that with Encina, Pennsylvania does have that exemption, and Clean Air Council tried to fight their exemption, and the finding from DEP was, well, they say they're advanced recycling, so they are. So they automatically got the exemption. They didn't have to do anything. They just got it. And it probably saved them, if they had built the thing, it saved them probably $500 million in, you know, pollution controls and you know, keeping track of emissions and things like that. So that's a huge savings for these plants. And as they're already economically unviable, you know, it's enough to push them out of business. You know, it's a terrible business plan, honestly. I don't know why investors even are investing.
They're not.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you learning more about our new report. Please do check out the full report as well as a summary on our website, OhioRiverValleyInstitute.org. Kathy, Irina, Jackie, Sandy, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your work and your research. We really appreciate it. And again, if any questions arise as you're reading the report, please do feel free to reach out to us at any point, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. We hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.